Ladies and gentlemen, if I kindly ask everyone just to gather by the chairs as we bring the casket of Moshe Shamoul to his grave. We welcome those of you who are attending via live stream, and for those of you who are here, please take a moment to be sure that your cell phones have been turned off as we begin the sacred funeral ceremony. Rabbi Elisha Prero will be officiating. Once again, please be sure that your phones have been set to the quiet mode.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai mi'agor ba'alecha, mi'yishkon b'har kodshecha, holech tamim u'fa'al tzedek, v'dover emes bilvavo, lo ragala lishono lo asav l'reyehu ra'a, v'cherpa lo nasa al krovo, nivzeh be'inav nimas, ואת ירא אדוני יכבד נשבע לא הרע ולא ימיר כספו לא נשא בנשך ושוחרנו כי לא לקח עושה לא ימות לעולם. A song of David. Lord, who may sojourn in your tent, who may dwell in your holy mountain? One who walks in purity, does what's righteous, speaks the truth from his heart, has no slander on his tongue, nor has done harm to a fellow, nor cast disgrace towards a neighbor, in whose eyes a contemptible person is repulsive, but who honors those who are in awe of the Lord, who swears truthfully even to personal harm, and never retracts, who does not lend money on interest nor take a bribe against the innocent. One who does these things shall never falter. Mizmor LeDavid, this is Tehillim Chaf Gimel. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, Binos Desheya Bitzeni Almei Menuchosin Aleini Nafshi Shovev Yancheni B'maglei Tzedek L'man Shemo Gam Ki Elech B'geit Samoves Lo Yirov Ki Atoi Modi Shivtecho Mishantecho Hemo Yenachamuni Taroch Lefanai Shulchan Neged Tzorai Dishanta B'Shem En Roshi Kosi Revaya Ach Tov Chesed Yidafuni Kol Yimei Chayai Vishavti b'veit Adonai l'orech yamim. A song of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of my days. We're here to give Kavod Acharon, the final honor, to a remarkable person with a remarkable life's history, Moshe Shamoul. Moshe was born to Avraham and Sarah Shamoul. For anybody who's familiar with the Parshiot HaShavua, with the portions of the week, this week's Parsha talks about Avraham and Sarah. He was born in Alexandria, Egypt, in 1923. The family traces its roots back to the Spanish expulsion, to the Gerush Sfarad, from which they moved. The family moved to Israel, but because of a difficulty in sustaining a family in those days and making a livelihood, they moved to Egypt. Moshe's father, Avraham, was a tailor. His mother, Sarah, was a housekeeper. In Alexandria, Moshe attended school in French until the family made Aliyah in 1934, when Moshe was 11 years old. Moshe was the middle of three siblings. His brother Eli was the oldest. His sister Eliza was the youngest. The family settled in Tel Aviv, where Moshe continued his education. He may have finished high school. I want to say parenthetically, I met Moshe a number of times. I can't say I was a good friend, but I had a sense of the man. These details are as a result of my discussions with Roy and Lehi last night. After he finished his schooling, Moshe worked in a stationary office supply store. He met Hulda, who became the love of his life. She was a girl from Vienna, a true Israeli shidduch, someone from Egypt and someone from Austria. She was 19, he was 20. They loved dancing. He told that to me. He told me that himself. Once he was married, he got a substantial raise from his employer because now Moshe had a family to support. As things were heating up with the British Mandatory Palestine, Moshe got into a bit of trouble as a result of mistaken identity. You see, his cousin, who bore the same name, Shamoul, he was in the Machteret, the Jewish underground. And as a result, Moshe, although he was not a member of the underground, he was arrested by the British, and he was imprisoned in Latrun with some of well-known historic Zionist figures of the time. He was eventually released, but he was subject to a very restrictive curfew. When the sun set, he had to be home. Moshe was a Cheverman and was more inclined to go dancing than to observe curfew. So he would arrange with his brother Eli to impersonate him and sleep in his bed. And when the British came to check, his brother said, "I'm Moshe." And they said, "Okay." His grandchildren report that he was an honest man who had no fear. He was devoted to his family, and his family was devoted to him. For a time, Moshe and Hulda lived with her mother. That means Moshe lived with his mother-in-law. There's a Gavra Rabbah right there. Moshe eventually got a position as a teller with Bank Leumi, where he worked for many years, eventually occupying positions in upper management. He was proud of that accomplishment, considering his lack of higher education. After a day's work at the bank, he and his wife would produce children's clothing. Moshe would cut the patterns, Hulda would sew the clothes. Moshe and Hulda had 2 children, daughter Orit, who passed away several years ago, Allah Shalom, and son Avrali, diminutive of Avraham Naftali, who's with us remotely. Eventually, the entrepreneurial spirit overcame Moshe, and he left the bank, and he opened a store. It sold office supplies and children's toys. Chet Shamoul, Chet, the letter Chet with a chupchik over it, Shamoul, on Rehov Yirmiyahu, together with his wife Hulda and his daughter Orit. And although its name has since changed, the store is still there. In 1981, they moved to Kfar Saba, where they lived for the next 25 years. Moshe helped Orit build a larger house for Orit and her children, and Moshe and Hulda moved into a little house right next to it. Moshe was the devoted Abba to Orit. They were never apart. And he was a devoted Saba to Roy and Lehi. Saba would drive them everywhere and do anything for them. Orit and family moved to the U.S. Moshe and Hulda followed shortly thereafter. At first they lived in a 2-flat, and then when Roy and Orit built their house in Highland Park, Saba and Safta moved in to the adjacent coach house. Family was everything to Saba, and they adored him in return. Saba was extremely responsible, eager to do the right thing. He was dependable, he was loyal, he was spunky, he was strong-willed and loving, both of children and of animals. Every night he would walk the Blau-Weiss dog. Although he was raised by religious parents, Moshe considered himself secular, perhaps even anti-religious. Something began to change ever so slightly as he neared the end of his life. He had spiritual visions, sometimes of his late wife and brother. Eventually, he said that he saw Sha'arei Shamayim Niftachim. The gates of heaven are opening. Words that I am told in his younger years were never on his lips. He told Lihi ani ohevotach. And he told Lihi the same thing about Roy, although he didn't tell it to Roy. He loved his family and they loved him in return. Roy and Orit and their children, Omri, Shaili, and Yoav. Lihi and Avi and their children, Or, Ella, and Aviv, and son Avrali, and Layla, and Avrali's daughter Sarah. I want to close with a thought here. People are different. We say in the morning tefillah, in the morning prayer, tefillat shacharit. We spend a lot of time, anybody who's familiar with shacharit knows that we spend a lot of time right before saying the Kriyat Shema, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, the declaration of God's oneness. We talk about the angels. We spend a lot of time talking about angels. We talk about V'chulam mekablim alihem ol machut shamayim zeh mizeh v'notnim reshut zeh lazeh. They accept from one another the yoke of heaven. It's perplexing, even for someone who has studied in yeshiva and learned the text. What does it mean that you accept the yoke of heaven one from the other? And then it says v'notnim reshut zeh lazeh, and they give permission to each other, lahaktish liotzram benachat ruach, to sanctify God's name. What does it mean and what's it doing in the tefillah? Why are we talking about the angels? Let's talk tachlis, what we need, talk about God. Why are we talking about angels? We know from the Kedusha, which is said in the repetition of the Amidah, it says, Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam kashem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom. We are dedicated to sanctifying your name in this world the way they do it above. Again, very, very difficult to understand because none of us, to my knowledge at least, has been up there and seen the angels. So what does it mean? And I believe that what it means is we must emulate the angels. How do we emulate angels? People talk about being angelic. It means, being supernatural. I'm not sure in this context that's what it means. When talking about Avraham and Sarah in this week's parasha, it says they were visited by three men, and those three men were actually not three men. They were not three human beings, but rather the rabbis say those men were angels in the form of men. Now, we don't understand what angels are, and you can't get caught up in the descriptions of these beings with wings. They are accurate, but they're not informative to us on this level. But what is informative to us is what Rashi says, why three men? And he says there were three tasks. These three men who are agents, and angels are better described as agents, forces of change from God. They had three missions. The three missions were to take care of Sodom, which had become completely corrupt. One was to heal Avraham after his Brit Milah, and the third was to announce that Sarah, after many years of being childless, would have a child. The question is, why send three? Send one. Save on the payroll. Just send one angel to do all three things, right? And Rashi the super commentator explains, Ein malach echad oseh shtei shlichuyot. A malach, somebody who's a spiritual being who's doing a mission, can't do more than one mission. There's no ADD by a malach because a malach does one thing and one thing only. Now, in parallel, the Gemara teaches us that individuals are unique and that's the way God created the world, that every single person has a unique combination of features that never was anybody like that before him and never will be anybody like that before him. And that's because each of us has a special mission in this world. It's a lifetime's work to figure out what that mission is. We use the Torah as our guide to figure out, okay, these are my talents, what do I do with them? What's the right thing to do? I believe that this notion of the angels they accept the yoke of heaven, which means a dedication of a life to God and to doing the right thing. They accept it from each other because no angel can do it all. No angel has it all, and everyone can be inspired by others. And this is the time for us to be inspired by Moshe Shamoul. We have an opportunity to learn from everybody. Each of us has an opportunity to learn from everyone else. Today we're learning from Moshe Shamoul. And it also says, and they give permission to each other. That means that the angels, although they are fundamentally different, just like human beings are fundamentally different, but we don't say, oh, somebody's different, therefore they're less. We say they're fundamentally different, and therefore I have something to learn. And I'm tremendously inspired by Moshe's life. He was not a religious man. He was even anti-religious. He thought he was anti-religious. He thought he was not a religious man. But religion is far more than davening 3 times a day and eating kosher food and observing Shabbat and the holidays. It includes that. But there's also a tradition of taking responsibility for people who need it. And that was Moshe Shamoul. He took responsibility for people who needed it. And what we see, a very unusual occurrence, certainly in America. 2 grandchildren taking care of their grandparents until their dying day. This didn't happen by itself. Roy and Leahy didn't wake up one morning and say, oh, we're going to take care of our grandparents. This was a lifetime's creative work that started generations ago, before Moshe Shamoul and Huldah, before Avram and Sarah, to the original Avram and Sarah. And although Moshe Shamoul, Maurice, did not consider himself a religious man, in certain ways he was accurate, but in other ways he was profoundly mistaken, because he carried on the Mesorah, the tradition of our people, of family and of loyalty and of honesty and of integrity and of hard work. All of you who are so close to Saba will miss him dearly and will have the opportunity to perpetuate his memory by allowing his inspiration, the ideals he stood for, and not just ideals, but lema'aseh that he did, to edge each of us a bit closer to doing the right thing under all circumstances, with the simchat ha'chaim, with the joie de vivre that he had. May that be Saba's legacy. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren who remember him fondly and perpetuate his legacy. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Next speaker will be Roy.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Alicia, thank you for the very nice words. And also, thank you for taking the time. I mean, you knew my grandfather from before. You didn't know him well, but you met him a few times. And thank you so much for really taking the time with Leah and I yesterday to really dig in and get to know him. When my grandmother passed away. Good? Close. Good? Okay. My grandmother passed away. You were in Israel. There was another rabbi. Tomer, what was the rabbi's name? Wolf. Rabbi Wolf was here who did the service. He did a very nice service, but it was really missing the personal touch, and so I'm happy you're here. Before I talk about my grandfather, I want to take a second and a couple of acknowledgments. So unfortunately, his 4 caretakers are not here today, but there were 4 women that helped my grandfather through the last year of his life. Samra, Charlene, Louisa, and Gigi. And not here, it's a shame. They're wonderful. Not just took care of him, but also not just took care of the body, but also took care of the soul, kept him company. He was a happier man. When they were here, he looked forward for them coming to visit, and it was just wonderful. So I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to say thank you to my sister, not just for my grandfather, but also for my grandmother. How she took care of them for the last 2-3 years, and certainly the last months of their lives, from taking to doctors to calling Bituach Leumi in Israel and banks and everything else, and also cleaning feces and vomit, and I mean, God knows. So it's not a given that you would do that, and it's amazing that you did that for them. My sister was there with my grandfather last night, early morning when he passed away, and she was the last person he saw. I thought that's very fitting. I also want to thank my wife. She's not his granddaughter, but the way she treated him was like she was his granddaughter. It was amazing what you did for him throughout his life, throughout the past few years. And I don't take it for granted, and I think you're amazing, and I love you for a lot of reasons, but even more for that. So these are the thank yous I needed to make. Hainam. Okay, so last time we gathered here was about a year ago, was for my grandmother. Hopefully we're going to stay away for a while and try not to come back here anytime soon. I guess we can't really complain too much. My grandfather passed away, he was 99. My grandmother passed away, she was 94. They lived a wonderful, full life together. They got to enjoy their children, their grandchildren, and even more importantly, their great-grandchildren. I think that's not a given. It's not just that they knew their great-grandchildren. Omri's almost 18. They had like a real, meaningful relationship and memories with their great-grandchildren. It's very rare, and we certainly were blessed for it, and we don't take it lightly that they lived so long. It's amazing. So my grandmother's passing was very emotional for us, for a lot of reasons, but mostly because my grandfather stayed behind, and we were very concerned about him and what's going to become of him, and it was very hard for him at the beginning, and then it didn't really get any easier since she passed away. He thought about it a lot, he talked about it a lot, and he missed her very much. Yesterday morning, we woke up Yoavi in the morning, and we told him that Saba passed away. And he was very sad, and he cried. And then I told him, yes, it's very, very sad. But it's also a little bit happy because Saba, he was old and tired, and it was time for him to go, and now he could be with Safta, and they could be together and happy. I don't know if it convinced Yoavi he was still sad, but for whatever it's worth, I believe that. I think it was time, and I think it was good. My last year, when my grandmother passed away in her funeral, I told you about our family's history and how it was intertwined hand in hand with the creation of the State of Israel, and how it matured and how it came to be, and how we all ended up here together in Chicago with the operative word together, because that's how it's always been. We've always been a together family, and it just made sense that everybody came here. These momentous occasions, like great sorrow or great happiness, they always make me kind of stop and think. Don't really have a lot of time to stop and think on a daily basis, and the daily grind. You just kind of react to what's happening. The death of my grandparents and also the death of Morty a few years back just kind of made me stop and think and ponder, and try to figure out what important lessons we could take from their lives. Not just what they were, but what can we learn and what we can be. How can we be better for what we've learned from them? When I started writing yesterday this eulogy, I was reflecting on my conversation with Peleg. When we talked on the phone, he called me early in the morning, and I don't know, we got a little bit philosophical, and I told him, we talked about how old my grandfather was, and I said life must end at some point, because otherwise it really doesn't have a meaning, right? I told him it's like going on a permanent vacation. If you're on a permanent vacation, are you really on vacation, right? So the question in my mind is not how long you live for, but rather, what have you done with the time that you're given? Did you make a difference? Did you leave a world a better place than when you found it? Have you impacted in a positive way the people around you? Or in other words, did you matter? So it's not that many pages, it's just, I can't see, so it's very large font. So, but what does that mean? What does that mean to matter? If I did not free the slaves or fought for liberty and justice for all, did I fail as a human being? I don't know. I don't think that's what that means, to me at least. I go back to my earlier memories with my grandfather. This is a little stupid, but I remember my earliest memory with my grandfather is the two of us. I was maybe 2 years old. The two of us sitting in a bathtub in their apartment in Ben Yehuda in Tel Aviv. And we were filling up these shampoo bottles with water. They're empty shampoo bottles. And then we were like squirting water on each other. I was 2, he was, I don't know, 40 maybe. Like a grown man and a little kid. And we're screaming at the top of our lungs, Zoti, Zoti, Zoti. I don't really know what that means. That's a word he came up with. I think maybe it's the sound that the water coming out is making, but that's what I remember. And I just have, like, 2 years old. You don't really remember a lot, but it's just the word and the sheer joy that I felt, squirting water in my grandfather. I think he squirted one in my eye. I remember that. And that would kind of stop. But to this day, when I squeeze out the end of a bottle and it makes the sound, and I think in my head, Zoti, Zoti, whatever. That's fast forward a couple years. I was 4 years old or 5. We used to play this game. He was the boat, and I was a boat driver. So I would sit on his stomach, and he would lift his knees, and that would be the steering wheel of the boat, and we would sail from Tel Aviv to Beersheba. We'd sail from Tel Aviv to Beersheba to go and eat a steak. And that's always what a steak looked like in our game, a steak, at Molly's Steakhouse. And we're going to meet Inga. Who Inga was, I have no idea. And if Molly's Steakhouse is a real place or not, I don't know, but that's always what we did. And we played this game often. And we would sail. And then almost every time the motor of the boat would fail, and he nods. She knows I'm going with this. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm taking your thunder. Okay, we should have coordinated. And he would make me dive to fix the motor. And dive means go under the blankets. And that was always after my grandmother would make her famous bean soup. So I'm not going to bore you with the gory details or what the fixing of the motor entailed, but that was my grandfather. Fast forward maybe 15 years later. I'm in the army, maybe 19 or 20. My grandfather, he was the worst driver, the worst. Like, he would sail the lanes. He was a terrible driver. In Israel that time, all the cars were manual transmission. You would have this stick shift car. The mission was to get from gear 1 to gear 5 in the shortest period of time. He would get out of a stoplight. It would be like a 10 kilometers per hour. He'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The car is choking. There's no RPMs. But he had to get to 5th gear. That's always his mission. And he also had terrible sense of direction. He was like a bad driver. But he was a very lawful man, so he would always drive the speed limit. He would always obey the traffic signs, the traffic lights. For somebody like me, it was very, very annoying riding with my grandfather. I didn't have the patience for it, but that's how he was, and that's it. So the story is, I get a leave of absence from the army. I come back from the base for the weekend. They give you from Friday afternoon. You have to be back Sunday morning. So I get home. I had to be the pickup point was in Tel Aviv. I had to be there at 8 a.m. I'm a young man. Saturday night, I go out, I party, I go to sleep, I blow my alarm clock. It's late. I'm already missed the bus. I'm not gonna make it by 8 a.m. to Tel Aviv. So the consequence for that means the next time we go out, I have to stay on base. That was a big deal. You did not want to stay on base. You did not want to stay Shabbat on base. So I go to my grandfather and I say, Saba, bad news. Looks like I'm gonna stay Shabbat next time because I can't make it by 8 a.m. So he says to me, get in the car. So we get in the car, and this man who has I don't think he ever drove over 50 kilometers an hour. He starts driving 120 kilometers an hour inside Kfar Saba. And then on the highway, he goes on the shoulder of the road, and he starts driving on the shoulder of the road, honking at people, moving people over. And I'm like holding for dear life. I'm afraid. It's crazy. I don't know who this, a little older and slower Mario Andretti is, but he is driving. He blew every stop sign, every stoplight. It was very, very yellow on the way. And he got me there 1 minute before 8 a.m. I made it out the next weekend. That was my grandfather. He didn't care. When it came to that, he was going to get me there on time if he had to kill somebody. And he almost did on the way. When my parents got divorced, my father got remarried and moved to the States. My mother was working long hours. My grandparents decided that they're going to live Tel Aviv, where they grew up their entire life, and moved to Kfar Saba, where we lived, so they can help us and help my mother. My sister and I was 10. My sister was 7. My mother worked long hours. We'd go to their house every day. After school, we'd have lunch. We'd do our homework. We lived next to my grandparents until I was 23. And then until I finished the army and moved here. And my mother stayed longer than that until she moved here. We never lived apart from them. In 2006, my mother got cancer. She called her parents, as she would always. And she said, you need to come here. Move to the States. In 30 days, they sold everything they owned. They were on a plane and they came here. It didn't matter that they left their country that they lived in for 60, 70 years, and that they were well into their 80s at the time. They knew she needed them, so they came. 30 days. And they lived together here. There's a 2-flat here around the corner right there. They lived together. They lived on the top floor. She lived on the bottom floor until she passed away in 2011. These were my grandparents. This is my grandfather and his dedication to his family. My grandfather was always there for my mother when she needed him. He was there for my grandmother as a loving and supporting husband, and for us as children and later as adults. You could always count on him. My grandfather was smart, funny, hardworking, loyal, and he was a role model for what it takes to do the right thing always. He put his family first, and he never complained. Even when times were tough, he did whatever it takes to make it work. My grandfather made a difference. He made a difference in the lives of employees. He made a difference in the life of his peers, and he made a difference in the lives of his friends. But most of all, he made a difference in the lives of his loved ones. He made our lives better, and therefore he mattered. It doesn't always take much to improve upon people's lives. Sometimes it's a good word, a nice smile at the right time, but most important, it's just about being there for them when they need it. If you take one thing from my grandfather's life, it should be the knowledge that you have the power to change the lives of the ones you care about, just like Saba Moshe did. Saba, today, when you leave this world to be with Ima and Safta, I want you to know that you're leaving this world just a little bit better and that you absolutely made a difference. Thank you. Tell me, you wanna...
First of all, thank you for letting me speak. I'm not related, but I had the zchut of knowing Saba in the more recent years. And as we heard from Roy, and by the way, Roy, Saba did tell me when you weren't there that he did love you. So don't think that he didn't want to, keep things quiet. We learned that it takes a village sometimes to raise a family. And the Blavais family is a small family. There's not, they don't have a village, and I got a little bit taste of it. Roy and Arit and the family went to Israel, I think, I don't know, it was a vacation or something, and I went to visit Saba, and I remember I called him or something happened, and somehow my phone number got twisted with Leon's number, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, I got, I don't know, maybe 6 calls in 10 minutes, and it just kind of continued. I'm like, this is guys. I felt, Saba, I apologize. I don't usually block people, but it got to a point where, so you guys, the two of you, and obviously Orit, who did a lot more than usually children do, and for sure grandchildren. Amazing how you came together and worked so hard. I'm very proud of Roy and Orit for, usually when people build a house, everybody talks, I want a movie theater, I want a jacuzzi, I want a big balcony. To Roy and Arit, it was like, we need a place for our grandparents. We need to make sure that they have a place, not a room, they have their own house. So that's, that to me is something that, doesn't happen, people don't talk about, but I'm proud of you guys for having the love and the connection. And Roy, I guess you didn't have a choice because Grandpa would have kicked your butt, but Arit and the gang really, they really stepped up and took it for the team. I know Saba was, as Rabbi Prayer was discussed and Roy discussed, was a happy person, was a witty person. He had a lot of life. I think he was somewhat religious, and he had a mezuzah on his door. We made some brachas together, so he was inspired and wanted to inspire people. And really, we learn about, this is coming up to the week of Sarah Imenu, and it says Sarah lived like 127. So Saba was in his year of 100, and he looked like he was 20 years old, and he had that energy that we should all have, God willing, at 100 years old. Thank God Hashem, usually a person gets sick and they clean up what they have to repent for, but it seems like Saba did not have a big list, and he, thank God, was healthy and strong until the last few days. I think it's amazing that usually people in their 60s, 70s, they start slowing down. Maybe they go to a nursing home, maybe they move to Florida. But Saba and Hulda, they said, we're going to move to America. So that doesn't happen. At 85, 84 years old, to say, and he told me the story that I think, like Roy said, it was 30 days. There was no, let's try to hold that for the price. Let's try to get, this is the schedule, 30 days, and we're out. And they did that, and they loved Roy and Arit and the kids, and they were, you know, and the rest of the family to really be part of it and enjoy them. And, you know, I know Saba had a mission to really, you know, get reunited, you know, with his soulmate. You know, he wanted to get back there, and, you know, I guess he gave her some time to prepare things, get things worked out, and make sure everything's ready when he gets there. But that's what he wanted to do. And thank you, Moshe Ben Sarah, for giving me the zchut to know you, and I'm sorry for not spending enough time with you. And you should be a source of happiness and health for the family, and I'm sure you're there in Shamayim, making sure that everybody gets to places they are on time, and watching over. And if you have to move anything, please make it move quickly. Moshe Shamoul.
קר לי. קודם כל, 1, 2, 1. קודם כל, רציתי להחזיר כמובן תודה לרועי ואורית. באמת עברנו תקופה לא פשוטה, גם עם סבתא וגם עם סבא, ואמרתי לרועי, סחבנו אותם עד הלום, לפעמים literally סחבנו אותם, אבל היו רגעים מדהימים, ונהנינו באמת לבלות איתם ולהיות איתם כמה שיותר, כמה שזה היה קשה. זה היה שווה כל רגע. אז גם תודה לכם על כל מה שעשיתם בשבילם, שזה היה בעצם גם בשבילי, כי התחלקנו במעמסה הזאת, או באתגר הזה, ועשינו אותו ביחד, וניצחנו כרגיל. אנחנו תמיד מנצחים בסוף. אז כתבתי כמה דברים. יש משפט שבטח כולכם מכירים, ממשה עד משה לא קם כמשה. אז אני חושבת שהמשה השני הזה, בשבילי לפחות, זה סבא שלי. אתמול כשדיברנו עם אלישע, הוא אמר לנו שחלק מהרעיון בהספד, ביולוגי, זה לדבר על המידות הטובות של הבן אדם, של המנוח, כדי לתת בעצם השראה לאחרים, to make a difference. אז באמת לסבא היו הרבה מידות טובות. לא היו חסרות לו מידות טובות. אני חושבת שסבא, כמו שאלישע הזכיר וכמו שדיברנו, לא היה אדם דתי או אדם מאמין. אבל באמת כשישבתי לידו בימים האחרונים, זה היה מדהים, הוא באמת הרים את ידיו ופשוט אמר, אני רואה את שערי שמיים. אני רואה את שערי השמיים נפתחים. וזה משהו שלא שמעתי את סבא שלי אומר, ולא ציפיתי לשמוע אותו אומר, אז כן, אני מאמינה שהוא באמת הולך למקום טוב יותר. מאז שסבתא נפטרה לפני 1.5 שנה, הבדידות הייתה קשה לו. זה היה כאילו ליבו נעקר מקרבו. כמה הוא אהב אותה, אהבת אמת נאמנה. נפגשו בגיל 19-20, ומאז לא נפרדו. היא הייתה כל חייו. בסוף יום עבודה, כשהוא היה עובד בבנק, כל החברים שהיו עובדים איתו היו הולכים לשתות קפה, לפני שחוזרים הביתה, מתעכבים, והוא היה תמיד ממהר לחזור הביתה לאשתו ולילדים, ומחכה בקוצר רוח לראותם. הוא היה איש מכובד שכיבד את הזולת ואת עצמו. נאמנות, לדעתי, הייתה התכונה הכי בולטת שלו. לא רק לאשתו, אלא גם לחברים, גם למשפחה המורחבת, ואפילו לכלב שגידל, שהיה שוכב לרגליו ולא מש ממנו, עד שהכלב היה זקן מאוד ומת. ואני די בטוחה שהכלב קינג יהיה הראשון שרץ לסבא ברגע שהוא ייכנס שם בשערים, ויקפוץ היה וילקק אותו. זה היה מדהים לראות כמה הוא היה מסור לכלב, כמה הוא דאג לו עד יומו האחרון. אני חושבת שזה משהו שאני זוכרת, שנשאר בזיכרון שלי בתור ילדה, ולא עזב אותי. איך הוא היה מסור אפילו לכלב הזה. אני זוכרת את המשחק הזה שהיינו משחקים, שהיינו יושבים לו על הבטן, שרועי סיפר, והיינו נוסעים איתו בסירה הזאת על הבטן שלו. רועי זוכר רק את עצמו, אבל אני זוכרת שאני הצטרפתי אחר כך גם. אז שני ילדים היו יושבים לו על הבטן, וכן, בסופו של דבר, היינו צריכים לתקן את הסירה, ואז היינו רבים בינינו, מי ירד, אני הייתי אומרת לו, לא, אתה יורד לתקן את הסירה, והוא היה אומר לי, לא, את יורדת. וזה זיכרון גם מתוק מסבא. אז באמת, רק להגיד לו תודה רבה על זה שהיה איתנו, גידל אותנו, תמיד היה שם בשבילנו, בשביל המשפחה, בשביל אמא שלי, ולא נשכח אותו. היה אדם באמת מיוחד, שהזיכרון שלו יישאר איתנו לנצח, ואנחנו אוהבים אותו ונאהב אותו. זהו.
It's considered to be a great kavod for the niftar, for those who are in attendance at the Havaya to participate in the burial. You've been here before, so you know what to do. The minhag is to use at least 3 shovelfuls, and then give other people the opportunity, and then after everyone has participated, then whoever is so inclined can finish the job. The practice is not to hand the shovel one to the other, because we try to disassociate ourselves from the necessary pain of burial, and it's some way of saying we're still holding on to life. So when we take the shovel, put in 3 shovelfuls of dirt, try, if you can, to stick it back in the mound, and then the next person will come and participate. And then the end, we'll all finish it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, while this is happening, if you want to take a moment and sign the registry, you can do that.
Cover the top of the
Okay, fine. So whoever wants to put some dirt, just make a line.
We have another shovel on this side. If you want to come to this side. Just tell me when we can put this on. Rabbi, you should do it. Rabbi, should you come up? No. Right.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, we're going to conclude the final prayers in Kaddish. If I kindly ask everyone to gather back together. Also, memorial contributions are going requested to Camp Simcha. That information is on the service folder, and for those of you who are joining us online, that information can be found on the Chicago Jewish Funerals website. And for the gentleman who's going to say the Kaddish, please come forward by the rabbi.
First we say Tziduk Hadin, I'll say it together with you. Take about 3 minutes. Hold on. Here we're going to say two passages. One is Tziduk Hadin, which describes how we don't understand the world really, but we recognize that there's a higher power that controls. Roy and I will say it together. Lihi, you can come up and say it together with us. And then we'll say the Kaddish. I'll say it together with you. Hold on 1 second. Let's get Lihi here. I have the same thing here.
Okay.
עצור תמיד בעלו, ככל דרכיו משפט, אל אמונה ואין עוול צדיק וישר הוא. עצור תמיד בכל פעל, מי יאמר לו מה תפעל, השליט ומטה ומעל, ממית ומחיה, מוריד שאול ויעל. עצור תמיד בכל מעשה, מי יאמר אליו מה תעשה, אומר ועושה חסד חינם, לנו תעשה, זכות הנעקד כיסא, הקשיבה ועשה. צדיק בכל דרכיו, עצור תמיד, הרי כפיים ומלא רחמים. חמול נא וחוס נא אבות ובנים, כי לך אדון סליחות ורחמים. צדיק אתה אדוני, עמית להחיות, אשר בידיך בגדול, תוהו רוחות הלילה, לך זיכרונו. עיניך ברחמים, עלינו כוחות אדון הרחמים והסליחות. אדם בן שנה יהיה, 1000 שנים יחיה, מה יתרון לו? כי לא היה, יהיה ברוך, דיין האמת ממית ומחייך. ברוך הוא כי אמת דינו, משתת הכל בעינו, משלם לאדם חשבונו ודינו, והכל לשמו דיה את בנו. ידענו אדוני כי צדק משפטך, תצדק בדבריך, ותזכה בשבתך, ואין להרהר אחת מידת שבתך, צדיק אתה אדוני, ישר משפטך. דיין אמת, שופט צדק ואמת, ברוך דיין אמת, שחור משפטיו
צדק ואמת, נפש כל חי בידיך, צדק מלאה ימינה ביד. רחם על פליטת צאן ידיך ותאמר למלך הרף ידיך. גדול העצה ורב העלייה, אשר עיניך פקוחות על כל דרכנו בני אדם, לתת לאיש כדרכיו כפרי מעלליו. להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי ולא עבדת בו. אדוני נתן, אדוני לקח, יהי שם אדוני מבורך. והוא רחום, יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, וירבה להשיב אפו, לא יאיר כל חמתו.
מההתחלה?
It's in Aramaic. I recommend you say it slowly so you can get it.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמה רבה ועלמה תהיו עתיד, ליחדתה ולחיה אמיתיה ולעסקה לחיי עלמה ולמבנה קרתה ירושלים ולשכלל היכלה בגבה ולמעקר פלחנה נוכרעה מהרעה ולאהבתה פולחנה דשמיא לאתרי וימלך קודשה בריחו במלכותה ויקרא. בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. אמן. מברך לעולם, אמן. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמא דקדושה. בריחו לעלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחה ונחמתה דיאמרן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
With this, the Levaya concludes. Normally, when there are Avelim, we make a row and we say Nichum Avelim. So here, because Moshe was obed to live so long, that the only Abel is Abel, right? So and he's not here. So we extend if he's on, we extend Nichumim to Avelim. Hamakom Yerachem Etchem B'toch Sha'arei Yerushalayim. And we know that there is simcha after sorrow, and we pray that our lives are enriched forever because of Moshe Shamoul. Thank you.
And this concludes the live stream. Shabbat Shalom.
זה מכל השלוש, זה היה הכי טוב. שאמא שלך, זה לא לך, אמא שלי, וואו, היה. אני זוכר,